I'll send you the check later. No, but I appreciate Alan doing this. And the other part of the team here, most of you might know Alan since he's been around in the Renaissance Society for almost forever, it seems like, is Sean Christopher, our videographer, who videotaped Tom Sukanik's climate change series that he gave 2 years ago and put on his website, and that gave me the idea of videotaping this and putting it on my website. So for those of you who miss any of these, you will clearly get the pre-readings and the post-readings, but you'll also be able to view the videos. I won't give you any guarantees on when those are going to be up, but they will be up sometime probably by the 1st of April, hopefully by the 1st of March. Once we get it into a queue, we'll be able to do it pretty easily. So at any rate, welcome to the, I appreciate your time. It's amazing. I had patients tell me when they came in, before I retired, I'd say, well, what's it like to be retired? And they would say, it's amazing. I thought I'd have more time. I have less time now than when I work. And, you know, other than the fact that I know grandkids are the reward for not killing your kids, you pick up a couple of these pearls along the way. And so the focus of this course is actually to give you some practical information to make better decisions and to improve your health. So this is sort of like a group visit. And my background is I went to Lehigh University. I grew up around the DC area. I decided I wanted to be a chemical engineer. I went to Lehigh. I got trained as a chemical engineer. One of my fraternity brothers who also played varsity basketball with me, it was a chemical engineering student that went into medicine. I thought that was kind of interesting. So I jumped through those hoops. I was a little late doing it. I didn't really decide to do it until I was a senior, so I had to sit 1 year out. I worked at NIH as a chemical engineer for a year before I went to Georgetown Medical School, and I decided to be a family medicine doc. And since the internal medicine residencies and pediatric residencies had all those, had a monopoly on sort of the Eastern residency programs, you sort of had to go west to do family medicine. So I came out here to Davis and Sacramento to do family medicine, 3-year residency. And in my 3rd year, I got exposed. I did 2 dermatology rotations with the dermatologists over at the Permanente Medical Group with Kaiser over on Morris Avenue and in Arden Way. And that exposed me to the Kaiser Permanente system of care. And so I went to work for the Permanente Medical Group in 1978. And when I got out of residency, I then got sort of partly into administration. I chief of preventive medicine and patient education for 5 years, chief of a family medicine department of 36 doctors. Then I helped build and run the Rancho Cordova facility for about 10 years before I decided that I would go off in other directions, and I resigned from the administrative team and went back to frontline medicine. I'd always been doing at least half-time frontline medicine as an adult medicine doc, even though I was trained to deliver babies and take care of kids. They didn't need me to do that. So it was basically adult medicine practice. So I always had an interest with prevention. And along the way, we opened the Rancho facility based on quality improvement. You'll hear a little bit more about that. And I went to Intermountain and got trained as a quality improvement officer. And then I retired. I took early retirement at age 60 after 30 years, and met a guy named John McDougall. And you know, the fascinating thing is I've been practicing up in Sacramento, and this guy named McDougall's down in Santa Rosa for like 20 years, and people are coming in, what do you think about this diet? What do you think about that diet? And what do you think about the McDougall diet? I was too busy, you know, it was Fort Assembly line medicine, 28 patients a day. But the answer was 95 miles away. And I don't know how many of you know John, but I've gotten to know him pretty well over the years, and he invited me to see corporate patients down there, which I did from 2011 to 2018. It was an interesting gig. Whole Foods and CenturyLink companies fly their employees in to live at the Flamingo Resort for 8 days, and I would get to do a complete physical on the first day, take everybody off their blood pressure and diabetic medicines, and see them again 6 days later and look at their test results, and they all got better. They had better numbers than when they came in. It was like detox medicine. And then in the fall of 2018, I told Heather, this is getting to be a young person's game, because she had actually asked me to see one of my patients there who had a cold, and I had trouble remembering how you do that. You know, I found the otoscope and the tongue depressor and my stethoscope, but I had gotten so rusty that I realized it was time to step back. So I'm in the process of retiring my license. Everything I'm going to give you is information. Do not take it as medical advice. You'll have to work with clinicians to make the best decisions for you, but you will be better armed with practical information by the end of this course, hopefully. So I then became a change agent within Permanente. We did some pretty remarkable things out of Rancho Cordova, but I realized that there was 80% waste in the system. And one of my pet peeves is when my colleagues get up and say I work for Kaiser. Kaiser never cut me a check in their life. I got my checks from the Permanente Medical Group. It was the first Permanente Medical Group. That's why it earned the Permanente Medical Groups, which, as you can imagine, drives all the other regions absolutely crazy. So I got the Permanente Medical Group is actually where I practiced for 30 years, and it was a great opportunity. I never had to worry about, well, I was going to see patients. There was very little paperwork. So I became a change agent within that system, and the little logo you see, the clinical catalyst, is my service trademark, federal service trademark, which I've had for a number of years. So each presentation, we're going to go over concepts and build a foundation. We're going to then review some chronic conditions to sort of drive those concepts home. And then we're going to sort of wrap it all together, and hopefully there's going to be time for questions and answers. And as I said, there'll be a break midway. Today we're going to cover, first we'll cover diabetes, then we're going to cover obesity, and we'll also hit non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, hepatitis, or also called non-alcoholic liver disease, and gout. So here's the problem. We spend 18% of our GDP on healthcare. That comes out to a little over $10,000 a person. That's 2 years. That data is 2 or 3 years older. I'm sure it's gone up since then. Most of the people in this room don't have to pay that out of pocket. You're part of some retirement plan or some other employer that actually shields you from that cost. But that's the cost. And I firmly believe and can prove that there's 80% waste, and that number should be about 2,000. But I also have a belief system that the medical industry is not going to do that on their own. And the way for you to avoid being part of that problem is to maintain health. Okay. So just overview is that people spend about 62 years on average in good health in this country, and about 14 years in poor health. And of those 14 years, half of that is in disability. One of the tragedies in my life was right before we came out here to Sacramento, my sister-in-law was involved in a fatal car accident, was killed by a drunk driver right before we came out here. Literally 2 months before my wife had given birth to our first child. We were living just outside of Washington, D.C. I was finishing medical school. And Bill Frickman was her boyfriend, and he was in the car seat. He was in the front car. She was driving. He was in the shotgun side. And what he did for a living was he took vans, and depending on people in wheelchairs and disabled, depending on where their lesions were in their spine, they would use different types of controls. So these people would come in wheelchairs, and they will tell tab jokes. And I said, Bill, what's a tab? He says, those are temporarily able-bodied people. Okay. So, we've got a lot of people running around who are temporarily able-bodied and think that they're doing all the right things. But I'm here to tell you, you're in a toxic food and a toxic information environment, and there's a lot of information out there. And hopefully I'm going to turn you on to some people who you'll find out some stuff during the course, but I will arm you by the end of the course to go out in the real world and maintain your health and get better. Because it's an amazing, the body's got an amazing ability to heal itself if you quit hitting yourself with bad food. And it's like that person that comes to the doctor and says they got a headache, and the doctor just gives them a pain pill, and another doctor sees the patient and asks him a more detailed history and finds out the guy's hitting himself over the head with a hammer every day. So the solution to that problem isn't necessarily a pain pill. So if you look at the causes of death in the country, for the causes of death and disability, we're going to hit 10. I had to put an 11th one down here because you don't hear much about the third leading cause of death in the country, which is medical care. This was actually a study that was done about 2000 and 2001 in the quality improvement literature, and this is just based on reactions to medications in hospitals in Colorado and New York State, actually, and extended to the outpatient section. I'm sure it's a lot worse than this, but this is sort of dropped out of the industries, you know, of all the literature. And it's a little bit like Exxon being a green company, right? I mean, you know, the medical industry has ways of doing this too. But today we're going to knock off two of these. We're going to talk about diabetes and chronic liver disease and cirrhosis. We're going to knock those off the list. And from a disability standpoint, these are the top 10 leading causes of disability. And we're going to knock off diabetes. And by the end of the course, we'll hit all of those sessions, okay? I will let people know that there are 2 video clips in here from patients that I brought with me, with their permission, of course. And you will get the slide pack after the course. So if you want to take pictures, you're welcome to take pictures, but you'll get the slide pack. You just won't be able to play the videos because the videos won't come with the slide pack. So let's start with some really basic definitions. Primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. Primary prevention is you've not got the condition and you do something so you don't get it. Secondary prevention is you have the disorder and you do something and you no longer have the disorder. Tertiary prevention is you've got the disorder and people like me with an MD after their name write you prescriptions or do procedures and you end up controlling the complications from that procedure. Now you will hear these terms thrown around a lot. You will hear aspirin used as a primary preventive for post-heart attack or heart attack or so. If you're taking a drug, you're practicing tertiary prevention. It is not my definition, okay? So you'll hear me use these terms as we go through, but that's what I mean by them, not what you typically hear out there. Now, my industry could have charged off into any 3 of those ways, but we've decided to focus on tertiary prevention. Underage, this is 2010 data. Under age 21, 25% of people are on a chronic medication. ADHD, you know, pediatricians are out there working too, you know. Over age 65, 25% of the population are on 5 or more drugs. The Permanent T-Medical Group, the Kaiser Permanent T-Medical Program, the last time they put this on their website, the results of their every 3-year survey that they do, that they put on their website in 2013, we had actually 25% of people on 6 or more drugs. So we were doing well, by that measure at any rate. If you cut across all ages, 51% take 1 or more medications. Okay? The surgeons didn't want to be outdone either. They charged off onto tertiary prevention. Cardiac angioplasties, stents, bypass surgery, greater than $100 billion a year, 27,000 deaths a year due to those procedures. And those are the deaths that are counted just in the first month after the procedure. Anybody heard of John Glenn? He died 3 months after his cardiac procedure due to a problem with the procedure. He's not in that number. Gastric bypass is a growth industry. Greater than 4 billion, 220,000, didn't even exist until the mid-1990s. There are no long-term evaluations. I'm the sort of guy who would see patients' status post-bypass surgery, gastric bypass surgery, you know, 2-3 years later be dealing with the iron deficiencies and all the problems they had. Not to mention the fact that a lot of them would gain weight. They get good short-term results, don't get me wrong. I just feel that anybody that does this procedure on somebody under the age of 18 should be put in jail, and people over that should probably not necessarily be put in jail, but should seriously look about doing something else. Crohn's disease, largely 100% avoidable during surgery. We'll get into the inflammatory bowel diseases when we talk about GI diseases a couple courses down the line. So, any questions about where we're going to head? We're going to head off the top 10 causes of death, the top 10 causes of disability. But, yes?
I'm just so curious, on the cardiac bypass,
Yes.
within 3 months, over the year, there'll be 27,000 deaths. So
Within 1 month, there's 27,000 deaths.
within 1 month after the surgery.
Right. In other words, there's about a 2 to 3% mortality rate with that procedure, so that's counted within, they count surgical complications within 30 days. Reimbursements to hospitals, it varies from procedure to procedure. One of the bosses that hired me, the PIC at Sacramento, a guy named Al Kahane, who was a fabulous leader locally, had cardiac bypass surgery and got dementia from it, which is probably about 50% of the people will have mental cognitive impairment after the surgery. I mean, you can imagine if they take your heart offline and put your bloodstream through a machine, and it's going to cause some unanticipated consequences. We're going to talk about that in a minute when we get into systems thinking. But Al, he didn't want any invasive stuff done. But when they signed up for the procedure, they signed away their rights to avoid that. So for the first month, he had to have interventions in the nursing home, like feeding tubes and things like that, just to prevent him from going back in the hospital. Right. You know, when you get into the details, it's kind of crazy. But to answer your question, the 27,000 deaths were, and Art, by the way, I took his seminar last semester, and it's fabulous, and it's called Transportation in the U.S. Government. And you're going to do it again next fall?
Yes, I am.
Okay, there you go.
It's going to be a little different, too.
Oh, well, they're all different, right? Yes, ma'am.
The statistics on drugs, does that include over-the-counters or supplements?
No, these are all prescriptions,
Okay.
range prescriptions.
All right.
You and then you.
I was curious about your background, the FACPE.
Oh, that's a fellow of the American College of Physician Executives.
Okay.
I wrote a couple papers, and because of the innovation stuff I did, I became a fellow with the American College of Physician Executives. Translation, I know where the bodies are buried. And actually, you know, if you notice the airline industry, which is a real safe industry, I don't think we'll get into it with the quality improvement, but it comes up periodically. Whenever a plane goes down, what do? They do a deep autopsy. They figure out exactly what's going on, they fix it. And that's why the airline industry has gone from where it was in the mid-70s to where it is now. You're going to get on a commercial airline. Medical industry is somewhere around bungee jumping and mountain climbing. But we do have one safe subspecialty, that's anesthesia. In this country, if you get put to sleep and you get woken up, you're probably going to be able to talk and wiggle your toes. That wasn't the case in the 70s, by the way. They've taken quality improvement very seriously. Back in the 70s, the equipment, like the green knob for oxygen, you turn it to the right, it goes up on some machines, you turn it to the right on some machines, it goes down. Little things like that sometimes get in the way. So, you had a question?
Yes, I wonder if you could repeat the questions from people in the back of the room.
Oh, great. Yeah, question. Did everybody in the back of the room hear the questions? Okay. The FACPE is a fellow in the American College of Physician Executives. I've given talks for them. I don't do that as much anymore. You know, when you get up in front of a lot of leaders and you tell them there's 80% waste in the system, it doesn't lead you to get invited back again. Yes, sir.
I was going to say that at one point, the first thing that airlines would do would be to take their insignia off of the plane.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, he was just making a comment about airlines and the way they approach taking sick people off planes and things like that, right?
Well, no, I was saying when the planes went down, they would send people out to take off the insignia, so you couldn't tell what airline it was.
They took off the insignia. It's greenwash, huh? Yeah. Well, and if you're interested, you can send me an email. There's a great video called Playing It Safe, where a guy does a very fabulous presentation. He walks through all the major airline crashes, starting with Tenerife and the Canary Islands back in the 70s, all the way up into the 90s, and goes through what, and there's some pretty, I mean, except for people dying, there's some pretty humorous things in there. So let's get into systems thinking a little bit. A system is a set of things, people, cells, molecules, whatever, interconnected in such a way as to produce its own pattern of behavior over time. Systems. We are surrounded by systems. You hear the term all the time. It can be broken up into sort of two silos if you want to make it simple. There's a lot of overlap, but there's complicated and there's complex. For those of you taking chemistry at any time in your life, because I was a chemical engineer, you know, you've got these beakers and you put chemicals in them and you measure them and you get to weigh things, and you do the same thing over and over again, you get pretty predictable result. Complex systems aren't like that. You can do the same things at different times and get different results. So they're unpredictable, and you also get something called unanticipated outcomes. These are outcomes that you will deny for as long as possible, okay, that you wouldn't imagine would happen. And one of my pet peeves are all these advertisements about optimizing your diet. This is the optimal diet. You do not optimize complex systems. It's not possible. You give a complex system inputs, and the complex system adjusts and gives you outputs. If you give it the right inputs, you will get good outputs for the most part. But a lot of times you give it inputs, you get things that you don't anticipate. So one example is Operation Cat Drop. Okay, this was in the 1950s, about 52 I think. There was an outbreak of malaria in Borneo. So the World Health Organization, wanting to solve the problem, dropped lots of DDT. Kill the mosquitoes, of course. And it worked. Malaria went down. Then the unanticipated consequences started to kick in. They killed off parasitic wasps that kept the thatch-eating caterpillars in check. So there was an outbreak of caterpillars eating thatched roofs, and the thatched roofs were caving in. So the government stepped in and gave them 10 roofs, which didn't help sleeping in the tropics with the rain and stuff like that. Meanwhile, the cats were eating all the dead insects. They were dying, which led to an outbreak of rats, which led to the World Health Organization saying, well, we may have an outbreak of bubonic plague now. We better put the cats back. So they got the Royal Air Force to drop in 14,000 cats. So, this is a chart of the known, at this point, human metabolic pathways. There's no way I could display that. Anytime anybody wants to display these things, they're usually talking about one or two of them. So anytime somebody tells you they can give you a pill, or they want to give you a magic food or a supplement and optimize your health, just think about this slide. They have no way of knowing what's going to happen. And this gets us into the difference between reductionistic science, where you're studying little things, or whole, the whole. Colin Campbell, T. Colin Campbell, how many people are familiar with the China study? Fair number. Or Whole, his second book. Our oldest son's best friend was having a baby shower. And they actually invite guys to baby showers for some crazy reason. But it was in my house and I couldn't dodge the invitation, so went to the baby shower. And the lady who was there said, you've got to read this book called The China Study. So my wife and I read it, and that was about 14 years ago, and we started eating whole plant foods at that point and got rid of we were vegetarian at that point. We got rid of the eggs and the cheese and the dairy at that point. And so he wrote a book called Whole, his second book, which talks about the difference between reductionistic and complex systems. And it's very different than the first book, and if you haven't read it, I would recommend it if you're interested in that. I remember that on page 152, there's an interesting study, and he cites an interesting study in Japan. He took an apple, and the amount of vitamin C in an apple is 10 milligrams. But there's 157 milligrams of vitamin C activity in the apple. When you consider there's over 10,000 nutrients in foods in the plant world, understanding what's going on is a little bit shaky. So you just can't squeeze all the juice out of an apple and add vitamin C to it and think you're actually doing the same thing as the apple. So quality improvement, which I was trained in, how many of you know about Dr. Deming? Quality improvement. He was an interesting guy, a statistician, and he was sort of the father of total quality management. Most of you in this room are clearly above the age of 40. But back in the 50s, made in Japan meant one thing, right? John? It doesn't mean that anymore. And after World War II, they hired this guy to go over and count the Japanese because he had done some part-time work in the Commerce Department, so he was good at the census. But while he was over there, just for kicks, he started training the emerging leaders of what was left of the Japanese industry in quality improvement, statistical process control. And Taishi Ono, who became the vice president of Toyota Motors, was one of the moving forces behind that. The national award for quality in Japan is the Deming Prize. So in the 1970s, when this reporter from an NPR station up in Rochester got the assignment to go over to Japan and find out what they were doing over there, because they were really starting to make quality products, especially in the automobile industry. So she flew over to Japan and got an appointment to see Taishi Ono and walked into his office, and he was very gracious. And after she talked to him for a few minutes, he just asked her what she was doing there. She said, well, I came to talk to you. You're the father of this. He says, no, you want to talk to Deming. And she said, well, where does he live? And he says, well, Chevy Chase, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. So she got on a plane and head back. But the statistical process control, higher quality, lower cost, and the bottom line is it's frontline teams solving solutions, not management, not tailor management like was employed in the early part of the 20th century. A Ford Motor Company, you can have any color as long as it's black, sort of thing. People on the assembly lines were having to raise their hand to go to the bathroom. Management made decisions, just told frontline workers what to do. And somewhere along the line, they figured out that frontline teams may be able to solve problems. But one of the quotes that I like that Deming does is that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Doesn't matter what the system is. Education system, medical system, political system. Okay, now it's in everybody's mind. Brent James was the moving force behind Intermountain Healthcare's quality improvement training, and I was fortunate enough to hear him speak in the 90s when it was starting to come in. When he was taking off at Intermountain Healthcare, he came and talked to all the executives at Kaiser. Unfortunately, it didn't take, although it took for me, because we opened Rancho on a quality improvement sort of bent. Brent, he started out at Intermountain, and they started with, the first project they did was post-op infections of elective abdominal surgeries. So it's a recognized side effect that if you have abdominal surgery, about 4 to 5 or 6% at that time, that was the quality target, 4 to 6% of people would get a post-op wound infection. And they studied this from a quality improvement standpoint and found 6 things that had to be done. Like clip, don't shave the skin before surgery, certain types of antibiotics. The list is 6 things, but the bottom line was they were able to drop it to 0.2 and save $30,000 a year in a hospital, plus all the suffering people get, when they get these post-op wound infections. And they went on to do some pretty crazy things. For their bypass surgery, for instance, they were exercising people who in the ICUs that were intubated. It would require a physical therapist, a respiratory therapist, and a nurse to walk somebody through the hallway while they have the ventilator along with them. You can tell I've been away from medicine so long the words don't even come. Brent is often said, if as a professional you're given the choice between doing the right thing or the same thing, never do the right thing. My wife, who's a philosophy professor at Sac City, always corrects me when I say that. She says meant the correct thing, not the right thing. And his point is, it's like an orchestra. You got people in an orchestra, if they all were playing from different sheet music or just doing what they wanted to do, it may not sound like an orchestra. It might sound more like noise. So if you've got 4 different professionals doing 4 different things, and they're all doing different things, you try and change something, you're not going to be able to come up with anything. But if you get everybody doing the same thing off a guideline, and then you change one thing, you can track whatever you're trying to measure to see if it's good or bad, and then incorporate it into the system. That's what he means. So AIM defines the system. Primary prevention, preventing something from occurring. Secondary prevention, elimination of the disease once it's occurred. Tertiary prevention, treatment or control. So if you look at a population model for diabetics in the population, you've got the normal population, which is defined now by fasting blood sugars less than 100. My industry used to say diabetes started at 150, but now it's worked its way down to 125. We came up with a new diagnosis called prediabetes, fasting blood sugars in the morning of 100 to 124. Then you have your diabetic population, which is above 124, who are controlled, within some parameters that we set as an industry, or uncontrolled. Our quality measure is what percentage of these people compared to these people are. So that in my last year of practice with the Permanente Medical Group, I was brought in for my last evaluation, which, you know, I was 4 months away from retirement. They're not going to do anything to me anyway at that point. And there were two people, the chief of medicine and the chief of chronic conditions. And you know, when you're going into a performance appraisal and there are two people across the hall from you, table from you, things aren't going to go real well. So they said that my number of controlled patients wasn't that good. And I said, well, in the last year, I had 12 people move from here to the normal population, and I'd taken them off my panel. And I said, if you put them back in the denominator, my numbers look pretty good. And they said, well, what do you mean you took them off? I said, well, their sugars are normal, and they're not on any medication. And the patient doesn't want to be labeled with a disease they no longer have. And they said, you shouldn't have done that. And I said, why not? They said, because we're being measured as a company on our percentage of control, and you're making the company look bad. I said, that's it. You guys have lost, I knew these people for years. I said, you have lost all moral standing. I'm going to appeal your decision. I did. It got reversed. I think it got me $200 or something like that in the bonus that I would have lost. It was immaterial. But that should give you some insight in the amount of stuff creeping in to the medical industry, driving people in the wrong way. So if I were to go into, and I'm writing a paper now on diabetes, I would say that this has got to be the aim is to create a population of non-diabetics. That's the goal. Everybody in here goes on trips, right? Do you ever leave home not knowing where you're going? Not having an aim is crazy. But if you want to go to place A and you decide to go to place B by mistake and you end up in B, you're in the wrong place. So it's important when you first start out on any sort of intervention or journey to know where you're headed. So I'm saying we ought to be moving patients in this direction, and we can also prevent them from going in this direction. Because now it's like if your kidneys are failing, and you're cooking along, you send it to a nephrologist, and then the nephrologist says, cut your protein down, because we know protein is toxic to the kidneys. It's like we wait until you get into the sickness range before we intervene instead of preventing things from happening. And diabetes is a perfect example. So complex systems, Dana Meadows was one of the moving forces. Not everything that is important can be measured. You'll see my patient in a minute. Drive that point home. And you want to find the proper leverage points. So since human beings are complex systems, Danilo Meadows, who wrote the book Limits to Growth in 1972, talks about increasing important levers. Information and statistics, we're going to give you some of that. It's a small lever. Stories, we're going to tell a few stories. I've already started doing that. That's the power of metaphors. That's a little bit more powerful. Trusted relationships, it's even more. Bill Clinton, you might remember Bill? He had bypass surgery. He had the bypass surgery in the hospital that had the highest mortality and morbidity rate for that procedure in the state of New York. Now, I don't know if he knew that going in, and I'm sure if his doctor knew it, he didn't share it with him, and I'm also sure if his doctor knew it, his doctor assumed he had nothing to do with it. Okay? There's have everybody heard about 30-second timeout for surgery? In this country, it's a requirement if you undergo surgery and you're asleep, there's a 30-second timeout. Is it the right patient? You're doing the right procedure? There's a checklist. It was all instituted by the fact that a surgeon in Florida cut off the wrong leg from a diabetic. Most people remember that. They did a retrospective analysis, quality improvement wise, and there were like 35 mistakes that led up to that. And the leg that he cut off by mistake was going to have to come off in 2 months anyway. Yet, that led everybody in every surgical procedure in this country to take a 30-second timeout, which, by the way, has not changed the result of same-site surgery by mistake. Hasn't changed the result because it's a very rare event. And when you have very rare events and you start intervening, you get what's called tampering, which are what you do when you intervene in a system when you have no business doing it, because it just doesn't make sense. Feedback loops. We're going to talk about feedback loops in a minute. Goals and functions, and values and beliefs. That's the biggest lever. So I use some of Bizarro cartoons here by permission, of course. So if you walk, other than the fact the guy's not listening to his wife, right? We got a problem with that, right, ladies? But if you walk into a food store and you think that milk does the body good, you're going to go buy milk. If you think it isn't good for you, maybe less likely. If you think it's harmful, addictive, and contains poisons, you're probably not going to buy that particular product. So your beliefs, we work through a complex system in the world, and we come up with our belief systems that helps us navigate it. And we have all these belief systems. So part of it, we're going to go down we will go down all of these in the course of the presentations, but in the long term, I think you want to think about changing some of your beliefs. It'll help you simplify your behavior and get to better health. So diabetes, let's talk about the big pictures. Type 1, where you have knocked off your pancreas and you no longer produce the beta cells in your pancreas, which produce the insulin, so you don't have any insulin. Insulin is the hormone made by your pancreas that sort of makes it possible for the glucose, which is your primary fuel, to get pulled into your cells. There's type 2, which is what most people have in this country. When you hear about people who are diagnosed with diabetes, they make plenty of insulin. It just doesn't work. And there's type 1.5, which is what we used to call it, but now it's got a fancy name because now they can push pills on it. It's called LADA, latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. These are people who have done all the right things that we're going to talk about to reverse diabetes, but still don't make enough insulin. So let's talk about diabetes type 2. Nothing to do with sugars. It's a glucose processing problem caused by fats. Walter Kempner was curing type 2 diabetes with white rice in the 1940s. Counting carbohydrates is substandard medicine. Should be done away with, should no longer be taught. They're still teaching it. My former employer is still teaching it in their classes, counting carbohydrates. Because I bump into people on the golf course who are Kaiser Permanente. I say, well, you've gone through the class? Oh yeah, you know. Do you know how to count carbohydrates? Oh yeah, they tell me about that. But it's the fats. So it's the fats that cause the sugar processing problem. You now know more than most of the doctors do in the country. Now let's talk a little bit about carbohydrates, because there seems to be some confusion. Glucose, fructose, sucrose, these are simple compounds. We'll see it in a minute. One of each will give you sucrose or table sugar. Complex are basically long chains of starch, long chains of glucose molecules. Fiber, which you don't digest, but your colon does, are long chains of glucose. They're just hooked together differently, so you can't digest them. So your starches are long chains of glucose digested by the amylase that you made in your saliva and that come out of your pancreas. It's absorbed by the small intestine, and it's your primary fuel. Every cell in your body burns glucose. Your brain preferably burns glucose, and actually about 25% of your glucose is burned by your brain. Fiber, oops, where are we going here? Fiber is digested by the colonic bacteria. Now, when I was going through medical school back in the Middle Ages, they said that, all your colon did was hold on to your stool and absorb water. Well, we figured some stuff out since then. Okay? The fiber is broken up into 2 carbon, 3 carbon, and 4 carbon short chain fatty acids. The C2s and C3s, the C2 is metabolized by your muscle. It's your carbohydrate, loading for those people that run marathons. C3 has metabolic effects. They have a couple of them that one is lowers your glucose and lowers your cholesterol. And C4 is not absorbed by the body, but those 4 short-chain carbohydrates or short-chain fatty acids provide protection for the colonic bacteria and actually a primary fuel of your colon cells. So I have a surgical friend who's recently retired, who's chief of surgery at Permanente at Morris, and he would talk about when they would do diversions and leave the colon sort of tied off, they would get, the colon didn't like it. They would get this post-diversion colitis, and that's caused probably because they've taken away this particular chemical from those cells. So it's very simple. Fructose and glucose actually look very simple. I mean, if this is about as bad as the science is going to get for those people that don't want any biochemistry. One's a ketone and one's an aldehyde, but the body handles them very differently. Whereas glucose is burned by all cells and it's stored in the form of glycogen, it also suppresses your appetite. It's on a sweetness scale, the international sweetness scale, it's 70. Fructose is only burned by the liver, although if you want to get down to the details, the epididymis in males burns maybe 1%, but it's primarily metabolized by the liver. It is not stored, it does not suppress appetite, and its sweetness is 170. So you can understand why they put this in foods, because it doesn't suppress appetites. If you're a food processed person and you're going to add fructose to a food, and that can be fructose in the form of high fructose corn syrup, which is actually just 60-40 fructose to glucose as opposed to 50-50. There is a 90-10 form, but it's not usually used in food. But you can imagine high fructose corn syrup actually is a very attractive thing to put into foods because it doesn't suppress your appetite. Now fruits, which have a lot of sucrose, table sugar, glucose, and fructose, also come with phytochemicals and fiber. And when you eat fruit or sugar in this form, in the natural form, the phytonutrients, not the fiber, but the phytonutrients slow the absorption of the fructose and glucose into your body so that your body can deal with it better. So it's not as harmful for you. And the studies have shown that unlimited amounts of fruit don't really hurt you, although I did have a guy at the McDougall program once, because you know, I'm used to, they do blood work when they come in, we take them off their medications, we do blood work 8 days later, and they're all better. And this guy had gone from a triglyceride of 150 or 170, which was pretty normal, to 520. And that was unusual. And I said, okay, what have you been doing this week? He says, well, I love fruits. I mean, because they have baskets of fruits around. He said, I've been eating about 10 or 12 apples a day, and, you know, bananas. So we're going to have to ratchet that back a little bit. So everybody's a little different. And as an engineer, I mentioned I was trained as an engineer. Engineers make assumptions, by the way. And sometimes we get away with it, and sometimes we don't. But I've come to 3 assumptions after this long arc of my career. 1, nobody gets out alive. 2, everybody does everything 24 hours a day. It doesn't matter how much you're going to put into it, or you try to put into it, you just do 24 hours every day. You did 24 hours yesterday, you're going to do 24 hours tomorrow, barring some plane flight over the international date line or something like that, okay? And the third thing is everybody's an experimental one. Because we have population variability. So what works for somebody doesn't work for others. And we'll get into this in weight loss when we get to that. Let's non-alcoholic steatorrheic, NASH, or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is basically caused by a buildup of fats in the liver. But in addition to the fats, fructose is metabolized to uric acid, cholesterol, triglycerides, free fatty acids, and inflammatory aldehydes. And it looks like it's the inflammatory aldehydes that probably caused the cirrhosis. Now, when the ultrasounds were invented and we would send people over to get ultrasounds, we'd sometimes come back and say, well, normal, but fatty liver. Rule out alcohol, because alcoholism causes fatty livers. But most of my patients weren't alcoholics. They didn't even drink alcohol, a lot of them. It was basically, we were seeing the early stages of NASH, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And that's the most common cause of cirrhosis in the country now, exceeding alcoholism, and is now starting to lead to liver transplants. And the risk factors are diabetes and obesity, which we're talking about. Finish diabetes, and then we'll take a break and go on to obesity and weight loss and gout. It's the leading cause of liver disease in the country, liver enzyme. And of course, we've got drugs for it, gastric bypass, but we're going to talk about fat loss, which works to reverse this condition. So measurement, this is one of my patient's studies. She's real interesting, but I want to just briefly tell you about quality improvement briefly. This is a run chart over time where you're measuring something and it's going up and down. You've got your means and your standard deviations, and before you go to sleep, let me just tell you the difference. This is a statistical process control chart where you've taken a bunch of numbers and you've figured all these fancy things out statistically. You don't need to know how to do that. We do that at Intermountain all the time. Specification chart is you put lines in and talk about specifications. You don't need to know that either. All you need to know is how to use run charts. Now this is a run chart for fasting blood sugar and weight when she was at 135, this patient, and you can see here she's a little over, this lady had started at well over 400 and her sugars were in the 400s and she had lost 100 pounds and now she was, sometimes she was meeting the diabetes, but for the most part she was a pre-diabetic. And this is in December, and you can see the numbers down here. This is in May. She's also getting into some normal results now, and she only had one number that was high. And that high number was caused because she ate a lot of rice the night before. So the nice thing about run charts is if you check your sugars every morning and keep them on a chart, you can start seeing what's going on. You start seeing the effects of what you eat with what's going on. You don't have to call me. Now, when I use this with patients, I will give them specifications like if you start getting below this line, stop your medication. Because the reason we stop diabetic medicine on the first day at the McDougall program, sometimes we'll keep insulin going, but without all the other pills and stuff like that, is if we don't do that, they start eating right. Because at the McDougall program, we use no fat in the cooking. We can get the fat out of the diet pretty easily. Getting the fat off the body, as people know, is a little bit of a slower process. We're going to talk about that. But so one of the first people I saw at the McDougall program was a gentleman, and you're going to hear from him in a minute. But basically, so she's starting to get, in May, she's got a lot of, quote, normal results. Remember, my industry sets normal. That's not necessarily healthy. We'll talk about that. We don't know what healthy blood sugars are. We know what healthy blood pressures are, but not blood sugars. So what happens when you're normal and your sugars start going up, they get up to about 100 or 105 or 110, and then you really go up. So it's not just this sort of linear, slowly up. You get into some positive feedback loops, and all of a sudden things go north real fast. The good news is you can get people back down those things. You can get people back down this curve pretty quickly. And that's what we do at McDougall. So we take the fat out of their diet. So I tried to figure out what a healthy blood sugar was. So I asked McDougall, and I asked Gelwood-Hammer and Michael Greger, and I asked all these people I know. And they said, we don't know. And I finally figured, well, I'll just send T. Colin Campbell an email. He did the China study where they did populations. And what he came back was, he said, there isn't any available data specifically, but the average in groups of 50 individuals, half male and half females, for 130 villages were 35 to 79. That's as good as we get. If somebody walked into my office at Permanente with a fasting sugar of 50, I'd probably send them to endocrinology real fast, even if they were healthy, okay? So here's B's. Ben was one of the first people I saw at the McDougall Whole Foods program. And basically what we did was we got the fat out of his diet, and he started working when he went home and getting fat off his body to a healthy weight. And basically, if you look at the fat in foods, oils are 100%, sugar 0, non-fat milk down here 1, potatoes and sweet potatoes and rice are very low, beans are very low. Most of your animal products are over here very high in fat. That's why getting off animal products. So if a patient comes to me and says, I can't give up dairy yet, I say, great, just go to non-fat dairy. If you want to focus on diabetes first. I mean, there are about 1,000 reasons not to do dairy, other than the fact that basically is you're not a baby cow. But, we can get into the details of that. But so this has been
McDougall immersion in March of this year. When I got here, I type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, really high cholesterol. Was on 2 different diabetes medications, Lipitor for my cholesterol and lisinopril for high blood pressure. I lost a couple pounds while I was here, and in the last 7 months or so since, I've lost about 62 pounds. Completely reversed the diabetes. My waking blood sugars are generally around 75, 80 every day. I stopped taking measurements after 3 months of those readings. My life's completely changed. I have tons of energy. I feel fantastic. I can finally beat my 6-year-old in a race, which is a nice thing.
So Ben, as you just said, remember what Danny O'Malley said, not everything that's important can be measured? I don't know, I guess you can measure beating your 6-year-old son in a race. Ben was an interesting guy. He had an interest, when I first met him, you know, I told him to take him off all his medications, and he said, I gotta hold on to my half pill at night for the metformin, and then he got too low, and we had to take him off that after a day or two. But his job at Whole Foods was, he was a specialty salesperson. So he was in charge of cheese. He had one of those terrible jobs where he got flown to Switzerland once a year, to the international cheese festivals, right? Ben had to change his job. He's now the service manager for Northern California. So those are the sort of unanticipated consequences you sometimes get in controlling your environment, which you see is important. So I have a son-in-law who's type 1, and I've had a few patients at type 1.5, but it doesn't matter whether you're making insulin or not. Well, my son-in-law found, because my daughter and my son-in-law went on plants about the same time my wife and I did, so they eliminated a lot of the fats in our diet, is his insulin requirement went down 30%. So the insulin he was injecting was working better. So even if you're not making insulin and you're injecting exogenous insulin, you'll use less. And his cholesterol and blood pressure are so normal that he doesn't need to take any medicines for his cholesterol or blood pressure, despite his physicians at Kaiser and Santa Rosa trying to push those pills on him, even without testing, which I think is a little bit borderline unethical. But they're doing that now, and I get that from some people. Oh yeah, they want me to take a statin. I said, what's your cholesterol? I said, they didn't even bother to check. So we've gone a little bit too far in that way. So we'll take a 10-minute break and come back, and then we'll finish up with weight loss and gout. And if anybody has any questions, you can come up afterwards. Remember, the little boy potty is down that end of the hall, the little girl potty is down this end of the hall on the first floor. Why don't we get back and get started? I'd like to leave a little bit of time to get the questions. Also, okay, there we go. Nice to teach old docs new tricks, old people new tricks. So, the diabetes, to get your insulin working better, you need to get the fat out of your diet, which is done pretty quickly, and you need to get fat off your body. That doesn't happen quite so fast, for those of you who've ever done that before. So we're going to talk about weight loss now, because it's important to get better with the diabetes. Now, we used to think fat cells just stored fat for energy, but we now know that there are hundreds of receptor sites, and fat cells actually make hundreds of other substances that they use to commit to other cells. So you can see how, as we learn about this stuff, how much more complicated and complex it gets. So we'll try and make it simple. The concept of calorie density, which is calories per pound, is the central organizing concept on weight loss. You have to understand that when I started to work at Kaiser, there weren't personal physicians. And then they said, well, it'd be a good idea for marketing if you have personal physicians. It made sense to us, so we gave it. And then they said, well, why don't you bring your lists in for your personal physician? So people started bringing in lists. Of course, administration didn't give me any more time to deal with people with lists, but that's okay. But somewhere on the list was often, I'd like to lose a few pounds. And people were coming in with all these different diets, right? And the diets that were coming out when I started 30 years later were starting to come back. Although sometimes they've got different names, you know, the keto diet, the paleo diet, the fasting diet. But the calorie density is the concept. And for those of you that got emails, some of you didn't get the email pre-reading. If you didn't, make sure you come up and write it down on my pad, and I'll make sure you get it. I'm actually, the handout for this class is going to go out with the pre-readings on them as well, with some additional recommendations for people that want a little bit more in-depth understanding of some of this stuff. But basically, whole foods don't come with labels. If you buy an apple, they don't have the labels, they don't have the ingredients on the apples yet, okay? But anything that has a label usually has some processing going on. Either they've added something or they've taken stuff away. Usually they're decreasing the water, decreasing the fiber, and they're adding refined ingredients like sugars and fats. The leading source of calories for women in this country since 1980 is salad oils. Salad oil, olive oil, canola oil, it doesn't matter. They're all 4,000 calories per pound. Motor oil is probably 4,000 calories per pound. I don't know anybody that does that, but sugars are 1,800 calories per pound. You're going to see this, and if you saw Jeff Novick's video, 1 hour presentation, calorie density, he does a much more humorous way of getting into the details, so we're going to sort of give you a higher view. So this is basically the chart that I carry around in my brain. Vegetables are 100 calories per pound. Humans, all humans consume 3 to 5 pounds of food every day. That's what we do. It varies from person to person, but for an individual, it's about the same. So you can imagine if you eat 3 pounds of food a day, or even 5 pounds, and you're eating nothing but vegetables, you're only going to get a maximum of 500 calories. You're going to starve to death. So if we lock you in a room, feed you nothing but vegetables, you're going to starve to death. Now if you cook them, if you cook foods, you'll actually increase your calorie intake by about 10%. That's one of the reasons we cook it. That's sort of the science behind it. Fruits are 300. You're still going to starve to death. It'll just be slower. The unrefined carbohydrates are your starches, your grains, your potatoes, your sweet potatoes. Great foods. But you almost have to get up to that level to get up to about 1,500 or 2,000 calories a day so you can lead an active life. You need fuel. Your brain needs fuel. You need glucose. Beans are about 600. The meats are about 1,000 on average. Refined carbohydrates, your processed carbohydrates, like breads, about 1,400. Sugar and cheese are about 1,800. Junk foods are 2,300. These are your energy bars. Nuts and seeds, 2,800. And oils, 4,000 calories per pound. The international body that sets recommendations for lowering the incidence of cancer says you should be at about 500, a little less than 500. So if you eat on this part of the list, you're going to do fine. Now, there are some tricks here. Apples are 236, but if you dry them out, they jump up to 1103. So you can eat more apples or apple slices that are dried. Yeah. Russet potatoes are only 440. It's a great food. Actually, in 1929, they put a man and a woman on nothing but potatoes for 2 years. They did fine. Then we lost too much weight, so they had to add oil to it. They were physically active as well. But if you take a russet potato and cut it up into little strips and dump it into oil and fry it, what do you got? French fry, right? The leading vegetable intake for people in this country are French fries. A French fry is not a potato. Okay. But from a calorie density standpoint, and of course this number can vary depending on how much oil is absorbed, there are your beans. Pasta in its dried form is like a processed carbohydrate, 1766. But what happens to it when you cook it? You add water back into it, right? So it becomes less calorie dense, so it's a good food. Chicken, depending on how it's made, it varies. Hamburgers, flour, sugar, and cheese are 1,800. I mentioned that. Chips, oil. So you can get a sense for which foods are high and which foods are low. There's actually a website called Chronometer that you can figure out how you're going to do that. Now, this is courtesy of Jeff, gave me this slide. If you look at 1970, this is the food intake by category. People in this country, 1990 and 2000. Dairy has gone up 63%, fruits 23%, mostly in dried fruits, by the way. Vegetables dropped, meats went up a little, chicken went up a lot, beef went down, flour products are way up. Other dairy fats are cheeses. Cheese is a very interesting situation. You know, I have patients that come into me and, you know, I tell them about what to eat, and they say, well, yeah, I can give up meat, doc, but just don't take my cheese away from me. The cheese industry has you divided up into marketing segments. Shouldn't come as a surprise to you. 20% are in the upper segment. These are cheese cravers. They take cheese straight out of the package every day. 20% are cheese enhancers. They put cheese on everything. So 40% of the people in the country are biochemically addicted to cheese. And why is that? Because the casein, which is the main protein in cheese, is metabolized to 8 different casomorphins. These are morphine-like compounds in the gut and absorbed. So you have to get away from these foods for about 3 weeks to get away from them, get away from the craving, to let your tastes readjust. So you can imagine, this isn't nuclear physics. This is your stomach on 400 calories of oil, 400 calories of chicken, and 400 calories of spinach, eggplant, and beans. Not cooked with oil, by the way. You could say, you know, it's just bulk. Which ones do you think are going to fill you up more? So these both have 453 calories. 5 ounces of gummy bears or 2 pounds of pineapple. There's your calorie density. 1465, 227. A cup of cashews, 6½ small baked potatoes with salsa. I don't know if I can eat that many. I know I can eat that much cashews. So the diets, it's diets versus lifestyle. Here, say what you will about eating children, and here's the Atkins diet, okay? When I was first starting out, there was a guy named Nathan Pritikin. He wasn't a doctor, but he came up with the Pritikin diet, and he was poo-pooed by the medical industry. And he got sued by the Atkins people, and unfortunately Atkins died before the suit, so they withdrew the suit. When Pritikin died, he required that his body go through an autopsy and the results get published in the New York Times. And he had no coronary artery disease. Atkins, on the other hand, died from coronary artery disease. Now, here's part of the issue. Because remember, everybody's an experiment of one, right? So all the skinny people in the world think they're doing everything right, and the fat people are eating too much food. This has nothing to do with that. You just eat to satiety on a regular basis. You take 100 people and put them in the same food environment, you can get some fat people, some thin people, and some people in the middle. Okay? I don't make up the rules, okay? When you come in and you start losing weight, it comes off your face first, breasts disappear. Trust me, the last thing that goes away is what you want to go away first. Don't kill the messenger here, okay? I'm just telling you what works. I mean, I'm still working on some of this stuff down here. So we're going to talk about measurement, but before we get there, I want to talk about the Hawaiian study, which is one of my favorite studies by Shintani. He took 21 adults for 21 days, and they were on a standard American diet. This is what a standard American diet is: fat, protein, and carbohydrates in percentages. They put them on a standard diet for traditional Hawaiian, which is very taro sweet potato based. They had to eat as much as they wanted. They ate to satiety, and they decreased almost 1,000 calories per day, even though they weren't hungry. And their average weight loss was 10.8 pounds. Pressures went down, blood pressure, cholesterols, triglycerides, fasting sugars all got better. Now, that's impressive. And we do this, we see this at the McDougall program. So I remember I told you I do a physical, and then 6 days, 7 days later, I do an exit exam, and people are really stoked. They've lost ½ an inch off their belly, they're down 3 or 4 pounds, and they're really excited. And I say, do you want the good news or the bad news? And they say, well, good news. I say, great. You got ½ a pound of fat on it. Because remember, a pound of fat is 3,500 calories. And you've got to really drop your calories down. I mean, in these people at 1,000 calories less a day, you know, that's going to lead to a substantial fat loss. But then they look at me and say, well, where's the other couple pounds coming from? And I said, well, it's 2 things. At McDougall, they don't add salt. When your body takes in salt, you retain water. How many remember the Slim Fast diet? How many people want 11 chocolate milkshakes a day with guaranteed weight loss? You know, they took that to the bank. And you know why they were able to do that? They did that because there's no salt in Slim Fast. So you went from the standard American diet of 5 grams of salt a day, on average, 4.5, 5 grams, to 0 grams. Your body just loses water. That's what happens after the end of a couple weeks. You know, so much for the Slim Fast diet. Fortunately, Doug Lyle, who you'll hear about a little later on in the course, pointed that out to me. Because it's always a question I had, is why people lost so much on the Slim Fast diet. So, where's the other weight coming from? The average, so if you're a guy in this country and you're doing the standard American diet, put something in the top hole and every day something comes out the bottom hole. Doesn't say anything about your transit time. This is my chemical engineering background. Okay? 5 days on average. You start putting more fiber and water into your diet, it goes down to 2 days. That's where they lose a ½ inch off the belly, and that's where the extra pound of fat loss comes, the extra pound of weight comes from. Now, so the really bad news is they've lost as much water weight in a week they're going to lose, lost as much stool as they're going to lose. So from now on, it's fat loss at ½ pound to 3/4 of a pound a week, depending on where you are on the calorie density scale and how much you exercise, which is a small part of it, but it's an important part of it to understand. Anybody in the room not know their BMI? Everybody knows their BMI. You don't know your BMI? It's basically, it was a measure that was invented by Adulte Quetelet back and published in 1832. That publication, there's only one copy left, and it's in the rare book room in Oxford. So most of the other studies I've been able to get a hold of. Ansel Keys, which was a famous population biologist, popularized body mass index in 1972. It should not be used for individuals. This is like a height-weight chart, basically. It's a measure of your weight over your height squared in metrics. I don't know the exact thing. It got calculated for me. Romero and Carroll did a study in 2008 and said it misses 50% of adult obesity. 50%. Especially poor and the elderly. Sorry about that, folks. And men. Misclassifies 30% men and 12% women, mainly for two reasons. Hypermuscular obesity. These are those people with a lot of muscle that look bad in a height-weight chart, right? Because they got a lot of muscle. Sort of the look I was looking for when I was an adolescent. At that point, I actually thought women liked that sort of thing. But, you know. Sarcopenic obesity, nobody likes that term, so it's now called normal weight obesity, which is more prevalent and important for this crowd. This is people who are normal weight, but have very little body mass, because they sit around all the time. They're weak. They've gotten out of shape. We're going to talk about fitness in this course as we go along. We're not going to talk about it much today because we don't have much time, but we will mention it briefly. So the BMI, now that's a fancy measurement. You need a scale, you need a calculator. I'm into self-care testing. Doesn't require a doctor, just some simple instruments. So the first test that I want you to do is the full-length body mirror test after the shower. Front and back. If you like what you see, we'll talk about how you get your body fat measured. And then you go to the gym and make sure you're healthy and you've got good muscle mass and you're functional, and then we'll talk about getting your body mass measured. But at that point, you probably don't care because things are going so well in the body and the mirror's looking good. But if the mirror doesn't look good, then you got to get to work. Okay? This is Kimberly's story. Now, Kimberly, so I hook up with McDougall. I start seeing patients down there. And Jeff Nelson is the executive director for EarthSave International, which is founded by John Robbins. People that write books make a lot of money and they put them in foundations and things like that. Jeff Nelson is married. Jeff Nelson's sister up here in Sacramento is married to the operations director at the time for the Sacramento Food Bank. And Jeff Nelson's wife had something called relapsing polychondritis, which is a fatal rheumatological condition. She found out about McDougall. They went on the McDougall diet, and she got better. Saved her life. So Jeff's coming downstairs one day, and she says, "We're going on the McDougall diet." He says, "Okay." So they've been doing veg source down there. They've been doing one of the first actual conferences where people like Esselstyn and Campbell and all these Novick would all come in and speak. But they wanted to do a McDougall program for the Sacramento Food Bank. So they called John McDougall up. I mean, if you're going to do a McDougall program, you might as well be at McDougall, right? So he called McDougall up and said, "What, you come up in Sacramento and provide the medical care for the people that are participating?" He said, "Nah, I get Forrester to do it. He'll do it for nothing." So I get a phone call from Jeff, and we do 21 people over at the Sacramento Food Bank. And what the Meals for Health program was, we would do week long. We did a weekend intensive intervention for the whole weekend. Then we would do some talks once a week for a month. We gave them all the food free. You can imagine the results were very good. But Kimberly was in that program, and Kimberly's a Kaiser patient. You're going to hear her story now.
And I thought, I was living my life, but I wasn't. I thought I knew how to eat healthy. I've had the same doctor my entire adult life. I've been a member of Kaiser since 1976. I knew what it was to eat healthy. Oh, eat this, don't eat that, eat this, don't eat that, cut your calories, da-da-da-da-da. It didn't work. I had IBS every day, multiple times a day for, God, don't want to cry again, for my daughter's entire life. 3 days after changing what I eat, I've not had IBS. And that's been almost 3 months now. I don't have migraines anymore. I have fibromyalgia, but I'm almost not going to claim that anymore because I feel so much healthier. I have so much more energy. I just am so excited. I've lost over 40 pounds in 2.5 months. I thought that I knew what it was to be healthy. I thought I was stuck in the life that I had, having fibromyalgia and just existing. I am so grateful to everyone here that started this program because I have a life now. I can live and enjoy my life and spend time with my kids and not just sleep all day long. And I never would have been able to experience any of that if it wasn't for EarthSave and Meals for Health.
When you take care of patients like this and see results like this, it drives the message home. It doesn't work for everybody. Now, what Kimberly meant by irritable bowel syndrome was 12 bouts of explosive diarrhea daily. So her daughter would look for her either in the bathroom or on the sofa. Since that time, Kimberly's backslid a little bit. She occasionally gets in touch with me. Her older son moved in and wanted to do some of the cooking, and you can see where that led. So she doesn't have the main problems she was dealing with before, but her weight's up a little bit. So gout is an interesting condition. The reason I throw gout in is it's probably the simplest metabolic condition I could come up with that we can actually treat medically. Uric acid is a normal product in your bloodstream. It's the breakdown of purines, which are basically your nucleic building blocks for your nucleic acid, for your DNA and RNA. And so it's a normal end product of purine metabolism. And it goes through some compounds to make uric acid, but that conversion from xanthine to uric acid, there's an enzyme, xanthine oxidase here. And we have a drug called allopurinol that can block that. So we know that if your uric acid level is above 7 and we give you this drug, it'll drop and everything's fine, you'll have less gout. Now, the primates in humans, most other mammals have uricase, which actually takes uric acid and makes it into some other product, which is very water soluble. So there's no gout in other mammals, with the exception of Dalmatians. Anybody had a Dalmatian that had gout? They have a very low uricase level, so Dalmatians get gout, but other than that, most of the other mammals don't. People who are at risk for gout have diabetes and obese. Obesity, actually, one of the reasons I like talking about it, other than the fact there's so much misconception about it, is if you can maintain a healthy body weight, it is the single best indicator for low healthcare costs. They did a study in the entire country of Italy, and the correlation with healthcare costs was directly related to BMI, which is a good measure for populations, remember, not for individuals. Ansel Keys was a population biologist. So one of the reasons for you to maintain a healthy body weight is it's going to leave you less likely to intervene, to be involved with the medical industry, which means you're less likely to get pills and procedures, and we won't kill you. Remember, the third leading cause of death. So, okay, so the target for gout is less than 7, prevent attack, avoid complications. The lifestyle issues are meat, fish, and shellfish are very high in purines, so that leads to a higher uric acid. If you eat more fiber, more folates, and other nutrients tend to decrease gout. And alcohol can be a trigger as well, and people who are over fat tend to have higher gout, tendency toward gout and uric acid levels in their body. But just because you have a high uric acid level above 70 doesn't mean you have gout. You can have gout with a lower uric acid level. It's just a cutoff we use for treatment. So let's wrap this up. I have time for some questions and get you out of here for forums, those that are going. Experimental 1. So what to eat and what to do. Caution on medications. This is medical information, not medical advice. If you're on medications like metformin or blood pressure medicines, before you change your diet, you want to make sure you talk to your doctor. Now next week we'll do arterial disease, which will include blood pressure, and there'll be some more specific information about that. But with most type 2 diabetics who are on medications, they give you home glucometers, and you can actually track your results over time on a run chart like we talked about. So this is a Glassbergen cartoon. Doctor saying, lose some weight, quit smoking, move around more, and eat the carrot. Jeff Novick sent me his blog, and if anybody wants to see it, I'll let you know. I don't have any idea. He doesn't have any idea. I don't think anybody has any idea what the term whole food plant-based means. People come to me and say, I'm on a whole food plant-based diet. I've had people come to me and say, yeah, but fish is good, right? You'll eat fish. Actually, plant-based to me means plants over 50%. The term actually came from Colin Campbell, who did the China study. And the book goes into that a little bit, but just to tell you the story briefly, is Campbell was born and raised on a dairy farm and wanted to be a vet and went to vet school, but they couldn't afford it, so he transferred to Cornell and got a PhD in human nutrition. One of his first gigs was going to the Philippines and try and find out why all the young kids were dying of liver cancer, which was a little unusual. So they found it was in their diet. They thought it was going to be something like aflatoxin, which is a naturally occurring carcinogen or something in the food, and it was in fact. But what they found was that the rich kids were dying at a higher rate than the poor kids. And that was that threw them for a loop, because the rich kids were eating foods that hadn't been preserved as much and had lower carcinogen intake. Then they came across a study from Matt Haven, who was an Indian physician, 10 years earlier, had published a study that showed that he could turn on or off cancer in rat populations based on the amount of animal protein they gave. So, Jeff likes to use the term whole plant foods. McDougall is often referred to in the movement as prison light. You go to the McDougall program, you pay John $6,000. John doesn't work there anymore, he's retired up in Portland, but Anthony Limbs, now is the medical director there, and he's a family medicine doc who also has a law degree and a business degree. Totally undereducated guy. And if you pay him $6,000, you go live there for 10 days and you get 28 hours of education and full breakfast, lunch, and dinner buffets, and Anthony takes care of you, adjusts your medication, answers your questions, and then you have access to him for the rest of your life, or his life, whichever comes first, or his professional life. They talk about fitness. The only really vitamin you need is B12. Most everything else you can get. The reason B12 isn't made by it's made by bacteria, basically. Now, back in the days when we were drinking water out of streams and not washing our carrots and stuff like that, we would get exposed to bacteria and have plenty of B12. For those people that do soy milk and almond milk, a lot of those products are fortified with B12, and you could actually probably get by with that without taking a supplement, but if you wanted to, you can take a 2,500 milligram vitamin B12 supplement once a week. Michael Greger, nutritionfacts.org, for those of you who got the email, you can go to nutritionfacts.org, and in February 2012, he did a series of 3 talks on B12, which explains the numbers. for you for the, it has to do with receptors in the gut. Non-smoking, lean body mass, and avoiding toxins. James Prochaska, who wrote a book called Changing for Good or Thrive, Changing to Thrive, was an emeritus psychology professor, now retired out of the University of Rhode Island. His father drank himself to death, so when he was in college, he got interested in why people do destructive behaviors. And one of the first groups they studied were stop smoking groups. Because if you come to me and you're a smoker, and I would send you to the Kaiser Permanente stop smoking program, and then if you didn't quit, what was the problem? It must have been patient, right? We told you what to do, you didn't do it. It's a patient problem. He took a different tack. He said maybe it's a process issue. So what he came up with was what's called the trans-theoretical model, and he tracked changers, self-changers in the state of Rhode Island, and he found people changed for two reasons. One, an event. You know, you go to your doctor and he says you got cancer. And you start changing things real quick. It just reframes your whole perspective. The other was interesting. The mean age of 39 and a half. So people get up to about 40 years of age, they're looking in the mirror, and they're thinking of seeing what's happening to their parents. They're going, you know, things aren't going like I want them to here. Maybe I better start changing. So the two things, and it looks like just scanning the room, even though my clinical skills are a little bit weak, most of the people in this room are north of 40. So most of you have probably gone through that time in your life where you've said, well, things aren't going well, you know, this is what he pointed out. People who change go through what they don't know they need to change yet, calls it pre-contemplation, and then they get some information like maybe you got today and you're starting to think about changing, then you do a little planning, do some action, then there's maintenance, and finally you get terminated where you just keep doing the right things for the rest of your life. 1% of people who are alcoholics who go through AA will terminate. They will never drink again in their life, despite what they say. There are very good reasons why people recycle. They go back. It's just the way we are. The people who quit smoking for good quit 4 times on average the year they quit for good. They're just doing it, they're falling back. So there's Doug Lyle, who's a psychologist who works with McDougall. Jeff Novick was the registered dietitian. He says this isn't a question of whether you're going to fall off the wagon. It's a question of what you do when you fall off. And there are also some tricks you can do so when you fall off, you don't quite fall as far. We'll get to that when we get into the next class. You want to manage your environment? I need to work on this. I'm married to one of those people that can eat half a cookie. You know, brings home 12 cookies, makes 12 cookies, eats half of one, leaves the other 11 and a half behind, goes off to work. I mean, how am I supposed to get down to 190 with this going on in my life? You know? And for those of you who are old enough to remember how the nuts used to come at Christmas with the little nutcrackers and the pigs and all that sort of stuff, versus now Costco. Okay? So nuts are a good food. But they're a little easy to overdo. So you control your environment, your home environment. I mean, if we lock you in a closet and feed you nothing but vegetables, I guarantee you're going to come out thin or dead, depending on how long. Nice to have support groups, and you want to support your willpower. Doug does a whole thing on that. You'll get that in one of the pre-readings. You want to eat low energy dense food because that maintains a constant glucose level, and when you do that, you have a tendency less likely to fall off the room. You want to keep a clean room. Your bedroom and your study needs to be cleaned up so you're not constantly bombarded with little decisions. Should I do this? Should I do that? Makes your life easier. You're less likely to fall off the wagon. You want to lay out your exercise clothes because moderate daily activity does help your willpower. And regular sleep. And we'll cover all those in future talks. So just support your journey. Nutritionfacts.org, Michael Greger's group. Videos and links to articles. You're now familiar with 2 of the ones I like. The only problem I have with Michael's website is there's so many, I'm on the board by the way, is that there are so many of them that it's hard to know which ones you look at. I mean, if you go look for dairy, you're going to find 80 videos. That's why when I send out the little pre-readings, I sort of not narrow them down like for the diabetes. John McDougall's Health and website, this is also a free resource. He has newsletter articles and lots of education videos. Jeff Novick actually did an internship with John in 1995. And then he started talking in 2006 at Advanced Study Weekends. And then he started working and seeing patients at the McDougall program as part of their regular 10-day programs. Because the McDougall programs are 10 days, their corporate programs are 8 days. Because when John Mackey came and set up the first program with Whole Foods, he wanted their employees to be able to take a week's vacation, weekend, 5 days off, a weekend. And they pay for everything. They even pay for the spouses, by the way, if they qualify. And Mackey didn't want to pay for 10 days. So he talked John down a little bit. He got a deal for 8 days. The other person that I'm indebted to is Neil Barnard, who's the founder for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, another free website. Neil founded this organization in 1985. I was seeing patients in 2008. Remember the lady who gave me the China study? She said, oh, Neil Barnard's coming to speak down at the local Borders. You got to go see him. I said, why? He's got this book out called Neil Barnard's Program for Reversing Diabetes. I said, sounds interesting. So I went to see Neil speak and got an autographed copy of the book. He said, how many third kids do we have in the audience? My wife's the third kid. I'm a first kid. So some people raise their hands and said, well, I'm a third kid. I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota. I'm a third kid. You know what it's like to be a third kid, right? You see the picture album, all these pictures of the first one, and a few pictures of number two, and none of you, right? Nobody listens to you. So he's a doctor, right? And his mother finally comes to him and says, well, I went into my doctor's office, and he says I have a high cholesterol, and he wanted to give me a prescription for a medication. I asked him how long I had to take it, and he said, well, you're going to take it for the rest of your life. She said, well, let me talk to my son about that. So she went and talked to Neil. Neil said, no, just change your diet. So she changed her diet, then she went back to her doctor a couple months later. And he brought in the results, and he says, oh, I want to apologize, Mrs. Barnard. The machine must have been broken. You don't need to take the medication. We get on average about 30 or 40 point drop on cholesterol at the McDougall program. We keep people on their statins for the week, so we take them off at the end so they can see the change the diet makes. We had one lady drop an LDL of 110 points. I'm not sure what she was eating when she came in. It's all obviously relative. If you're already doing well and you come in, you'll see less of a change. But I owe Neil because I started using the book that he gave me, which I think is still one of the best resources for type 2 diabetics, and I'll put it out on the handout after the class so you don't have to write it down. And that patients who started doing it started getting better. And then the doctors around me asked me to give them talks about this stuff, so I started giving talks to the docs, and that's sort of what got me into this whole thing. I've been doing it since about 2008. So anyway, I appreciate your time. So next week we're going to talk about blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, and back pain. I want to do something a little different though. I'm going to send out the slide pack to you all. I'm going to send out a handout with pre-reading for next week. But I'm also going to send out a little email. I want everybody to send me their age, any chronic conditions they want to hear about, and a personal health goal that you would like to work on. And what we'll do is I'll take that information and I will tailor the rest of the course based on you guys. Okay? Because I mean, I can talk about this stuff, obviously. I just did for an hour and a half or so. So I can do this stuff forever, but I want you to walk away with stuff that's useful to you. Okay? Thanks for your time. Questions? That's my website, which is going to be updated in the next, it hasn't been updated for a couple of years. But most of the material that's on the website you're going to get in the course anyway. And that's my email address, which you already have if you received the email. And if you haven't, make sure you come up here and tell me. I'll stick around and answer questions. Thank you very much.